Our world started with a data explosion, marked by an exponential growth in the volume, velocity, and variety of data being piped in and out of organizations. However, despite this new wealth in technology and data, businesses had never been so challenged to drive revenue growth, plagued by dark, siloed, unusable data, rendering their go-to-market motions useless. Until one day, the most courageous data heroes took back control of their company's most valuable asset, transforming their customer data sets from a burden to a true system of insight, capable of automating sales motions, delivering personalized marketing programs at scale, and driving predictable revenue growth for their business. Welcome to the Data Heroes podcast, powered by Ringlead.
All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on the Talk Data to Me series. We've got a serious data hero here with us today. It's Jessica Cao. Jessica's one of the top experts in the world for Adobe Marketo and has numerous accolades, from being a multi-time Marketo champion to Fearless 50, and I'm sure a bunch of other really cool things. I bet you get a bunch of swag from them, but she also works with a really great implementation firm, Digital Pie, and has been with them for a really long time. Has helped, I would bet you can't count on two hands how many companies she's helped with big challenges. And yeah, so we're happy to have you today.
Well, thanks for having me today. And like all my purple swag is in my office that you can't see right now. So it is decked out in purple, that's for sure.
I bet your shoes have some Marketo on them somewhere. But
they sure do.
So, we always like to kind of just start things out by getting to know you a little bit and know how you went about this journey to becoming a data hero.
Well, I can tell you that my origin story is probably like no one else. Usually I get a lot of double takes from like, how did you start from, I have a PhD in cancer biology. So I was doing bench research in cancer research for well over 15 years before I graduated and entered the workforce. So you can kind of say I've been dealing with. My PhD was actually in data, and so if you think about it, so my degree, where I spent a lot of time at the bench and researching and analyzing the data, was really in understanding breast cancer, and my entire thesis was really based on, can we use data signals, right? So your genetics, your genes, your DNA, to understand the difference and predict, right? It's that predictive piece to predict if someone had a aggressive breast cancer signature versus a non-aggressive. Because if you think about it, when you are diagnosed with cancer, doctors will guess and try things, but we don't know if it's going to become aggressive or not. So it's almost like you're taking data points to understand, like, well, can we predict so that we can start treatment earlier if we know you're going to be aggressive or not? And that exact same thinking around, right, because we're dealing with lots of data, is the exact same thinking and analysis that we use in marketing operations as a marketer each day and every day, because we're looking for data signals and data points to understand and identify and predict who is most likely going to be a customer, right? We want to do more of those things, and who is going to be really hard to convert, right? So it's really the exact same thing. And so I've just been a data, junkie for my whole life.
Yeah, the best marketers are data driven, so it makes a lot of sense that you'd come from a background where you were looking at a lot of information that drives, hopefully good outcomes. And that's, one of the things we always like to do in marketing. And we also have another question about kind of just personally, if you weren't doing what you were doing today, like what would you be doing?
I love what I do today, so that's, kind of hard. But if I wasn't doing what I was doing today, and like, for example, if I had all the money in the world and I could just do, with it, which is actually, I do today to a bit, which is I teach yoga. I've been teaching yoga for the past 10 years. I still teach. I was with 24 Hour Fitness for a good 7 years before the pandemic. And obviously the gyms are closed down, and everything's virtual, but I still teach some of my students every Saturday morning, and I stream, and I still do it as a donation of my time. and it's still a passion and love of mine. So I'd probably open up a yoga studio, teach somewhere, or maybe stream full time.
That's super cool. Yeah, I love yoga, and I do yoga. I did Bikram yoga one time, and it was new, and everybody had these water bottles, and they were all frozen, like completely solid. And then I had my water bottle; it was just regular, and I realized quickly why they froze their water bottles, because it's 90 minutes and it slowly melts. And if you have a full bottle of water, you just drink it as fast as you can, kind of. And I was, really having a hard time, but I love that. That's really cool.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, and I still take classes. So I still take a yoga class, really a handstand class, to keep challenging myself. So yeah, twice a week I'm still actually in my office. My other half of my office is my yoga studio.
That's so cool. Beach yoga. That's my favorite.
I taught beach yoga for one of the sales kickoff for one of the companies that I work with, and we had a sales kickoff in Puerto Rico. So I was teaching yoga every morning on the beach. So it was fun.
Oh, that's amazing. Lucky people. That's so cool. So let's jump kind of into how you see that your clients and just, overall just best practices for using data. One of the key topics our audience really likes to better understand is, like, let's just say you go into a company that wants you to help with strategy, whether that's, creating more demand or, getting more from the customer life cycle. Everybody always wants to know, like, what's the ideal account profile before the personas. Like, when it comes down to analyzing how to profile and target accounts, do you see that there's a strategy that's been really good for you, or a set of data that's been maybe underutilized but really helps that you'd like to share your experiences on?
I mean, so if you're talking about like identifying an ICP, and then yeah, so
yes.
Yeah, so I think well, one, which is before we even talk about data, we're talking about from a business standpoint, which is understanding like who your ICP is. I think it's actually cyclical, right? Because we're not doing this stuff in a vacuum, right? Like usually it starts with, well, who are my customers today?
Mm-hmm.
And that also helps drive the definition of the ICP, and then you kind of decide from there. Well, you don't want to be all things to everyone. You want to kind of, from a business perspective, go after, make very strategic decisions about who you're going to go after and who you're not going to go after versus some, more opportunistic endeavors. But then it always comes back to, you look at the data, it drives your ICP, you make a strategic decision, and then you go after more of those people, and then there's a data strategy that needs to happen after that to go after more of your ICP, right? So I deal with more the realm of, the company really knows best about who their ICP is. And again, there's other agencies that are a little different, like not so much integration or marketing tech agencies, more of the marketing agencies that will help you do workshops of identifying those ICPs. But where I see a lot, and where there's a lot of opportunity, where I see people, it's once they've identified the ICP, it's the chasm between, I have my ICP, I know from a strategic business sense what I want to do, and there's a chasm to execution and operationalizing that. And I think that's where there's a gap, and that's where people like me and that come in with the experience to help bridge that gap, to cross that chasm, because I think either one, a lot of people don't know how to do that. If you've done it a couple of times, it helps to have that experience. And there's that best practice, so I can kind of dive deeper into that.
Yeah, let's talk about the chasm. Let's say I know my ideal profile at the account level, because I've done analysis. And the funny thing is you said something about most people start with their customers, and I always say the same thing. And what if your customers weren't the right targets to begin with? You have the product market fit, so there's some background you have to do there, and then you use data. But once or
if you're going after a new market, right? Like you're launching a new product line. Obviously, you don't have those customers. You want to go after new markets, so you need to understand the TAM and a way to go after that market, right? Like how it's something new. So how do you do that? right? So there's a whole, there's a whole analysis that happens, to do that. But really where I think, there's a lot of opportunities where the rubber hits the road of, okay, like you said, I know who they are. They might be existing customers, or we know the profile. We just need to do more, make ourselves more efficient, or we're going after a new one. There's so much data out there, right? And I see a lot of people just like buying lots and lots and lots of tools, right? You see that. And, it's good, I was gonna say, well, buying tools is okay, but there needs to be a data strategy behind it, right? Because it's a no-win situation for you, for me, for my clients, for anyone. It's a no-win situation if you buy a bunch of stuff and you don't use it, right?
I agree.
It's a no-win for anyone, right? So I think a lot of some of the missing pieces is people buy a tool and then they try to solve a problem with it, and they do it in silos, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't, data is a living, breathing entity that you must respect, right? Your Marketo instance, the ecosystem, the Salesforce, the CDP, the data warehouse, all of that is an ecosystem that needs a strategy, all the connection, all the pipes from a business side, but also needs a global overall strategy for that. And I think a lot of times people they just are so focused on connecting the pipes. I agree. Right? I mean, I'm sure you've had that. And you're trying to help people. Like, hey, it's not just about buying it. If you want to make it sticky, you have to get use out of it, and that's really important. And so it's thinking through those things that I see, a gap in, and that's because if you work at one company, you're not going to do it like 10 times, right? You're not going to have an opportunity. Versus, I've seen it at, 20, 30, 40 different companies, and I've seen it, okay, this way can work, and this way can work, and this way can work. They're all different. That you can assemble the different blocks differently, but the thought process is still the same, which is you start with the business problem. So, right, so for example, you have your ICP. I know I want to go after these people. My goal is to better target, find those people more efficiently, fill the white space, get those people, get my data clean so I can execute. Right. So there's different avenues, there's different aspects to the data, right? There's the there's the company level data, right? Do I have that? There's the people, right? Do I have the buying council? Am I targeting the right people? Right. So that's a white space. That's a buying the lead data, right? Versus account level is a data append or an account. I need these accounts. I need to go after people in these accounts. What are their job titles? What are their things? And then then you layer on the predictive, right? Because there's so much data, and that's one of the things that I talked about at Summit. I guess it's 2 years ago now. Because there's so much data that marketers really have to start thinking like scientists, because we need to understand how to use all of that data, right? And just not just bring it all in. We have to be strategic about that, right? So now we layer on predictive, and predictive is, hey, I have a customer that looks like this. Find me data points that cluster with this. And this is actually what my PhD was. My PhD was, I know aggressive breast cancer looks like this. Find me data points that look like this, that associate with that. It's the same thing. I have a customer profile that looks like this. Find me characteristics of people that associate with these type of customers, right? That's what predictive is all about. And,
I think on that topic, right? Like when you start talking about intent data, right? A lot of the time, it's easy to get to the static profile of what business is and people. Then you start, like you said, layering this intent. One of the challenges I've had with intent is they basically have 89,000 keyword signals that you can target. And how if you're a brand that wants to onboard intent, do you figure out like the 50 or 100 that are the right clusters for you? I mean, have you had success with that process?
Yeah, and intent is, intent is a really hot topic. There's a lot of vendors out there that are offering intent. I see a lot of people get on the bandwagon, and rightfully so. It's like a new toy that we've had, or new invention that we've had, but we just haven't had a lot of time to play with it. Now that we've had a couple years, and I've done a couple years worth of different implementations, kind of see and kind of right, like I make them as, I try things like, oh, well, that wasn't such a good idea, right? It's not like I have some magic superpower. It's just I get the opportunity to try it a bunch of times, more so than, if you were just at one company and see, what's going on in the industry. With intent data, right, usually it's the first thing is intent data. How are we using it? We want to throw it to the salespeople. What not to do, and again, from learning that lesson personally, is, well, let's take all the intent data, and if someone's intenting, let's just toss it over to sales, and good luck, right? I mean, but we didn't know what else to do with it, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, and it's okay if everyone out there's like, oh, that was me. Look, it was me too. So we're all in the same boat, and so we all learned. Wow, the salespeople don't know what to do with it. We haven't given very discrete, if you see this, do this. So, and you have to remember that intent data is on a company level. Mm-hmm. Right? It's so if someone at a very large company, it's not someone, it's a company is surging on these topics, what is that? What do I do with that data? So it's almost like you have to have that strategy. So a couple of different ways. And again, I would also plot it on a maturity scale, right? It's not about this is the strategy, this is the best practice. What's hard about just kind of what we do is that, I try to get away from this is the best practice thing to do, and more of this is the best practice thought exercise or framework, because every situation is going to be different. Every company is going to be different. The people, the personalities, the skill sets, the politics, everything is going to be different. So what works at one company is not going to work at another company. And that's what we tend to do, right? We see these use cases, you were able to get this great success. I, as a marketer, I'm going to repeat that. But I've switched it to a lot of my, when I'm sharing my experiences, to here's the thought process that I go to, so that everyone has that framework, and then they can cater it to their unique organizations for a higher probability of success. Right? So
go for it. Yeah, no, I have a question about, you mentioned earlier about systems that you have to know, and I hear a lot about CDPs and Marketo, and I'm like, okay, a CDP, I understand how you get analytics, and at the end of the day, what you do is you create lists and segments, and you need to activate those segments, right? So do you have familiarity with, if you're a Marketo administrator and your organization is onboarding this CDP, how do you fit into the mix? Do the emails still get triggered out of Marketo, or what level of functionality do you find is replaced in the CDP that's maybe being done in the marketing automation system today, or are they completely complementary?
Can I finish the intent one, and then can we go to the
yes
one? Okay.
Okay, one second, watch.
Okay.
Okay, just one second. I got to do it one more time. Sorry.
Okay. All right. So for the intent, you have a maturity scale for intent. So when you first get it, let's look at the data and see, the keywords. You might want to just start with, there's 50 keywords, and you're just going to do one cluster, right? And then you just look at number of keywords. So then you look at the data week by week, right? Because the one thing about intent data is time dependent. Right? It's going to change this week to next week to the next week, which is a little different than demographic data. That's not going to change. So you have to account for that time component. Also, you want to look at the spread, right, of your accounts. What percent of your spread is hitting 50 keywords? Probably not a lot. Is 30? What percentage of that is 10 keywords? Is that a lot? So you're going to have to look at a couple weeks worth of data to get a feel for the volume that's coming in. And then I really like combining intent data with additional signals, right? Because intent, salespeople don't really know what to do with that. But what you could do is you can have an account that is surging for that week, add some points in addition to if someone at that account has a behavior score. So you're combining intent with an action on their part, maybe lowering the bar to get MQL, right? So if MQL is at 100 points and they're doing something, but their account is surging, that gives them a couple points to help them bump them up a little bit. So you're effectively lowering the bar for them to MQL. That is one way to do it. Other complementary ways are, if they're a target account and they surge, then you escalate that to the salespeople with very clear signals. And again, the clearer the data, the better, like a red, yellow, green, right? You don't want them to you don't want to dump the raw data over to sales. You could also use the data to kind of add people to specific nurtures. And then that gets, right, I mean, then becomes the endless possibilities. Then you take your clusters and then you start sub-clustering. There's generic terms and more like competitor terms, brand terms, and then you weight the clusters a little differently. And then you can combine, and then you can start doing things like outputting a score based on weighted clusters, right? Because then you can see how the complexity can go, but you want to kind of take one step at a time, run the data and see, right? I mean, it's an experiment. You run the data and you try. Am I getting better? Are the conversion rates that my sales team is having better? Maybe you refine more, right? So there's like a kind of a path of maturity to how you would use intent data. And I think people just come in and they're just like, oh, I have intent data. Let me just plug it into my whole system. Let me shove it over to the sales team. Let me give it to marketing. But we haven't taken a step back and understand how to use that data. And on top of that, if you buy a bunch of tools, you're getting intent data from multiple sources, or you're getting demographic data from multiple sources. And what I see a lot of is we're just ingesting the whole all of the data, and we're not strategically thinking about, well, if I'm getting demographic data from 3 sources, who wins? And the not the correct answer is who's right, because data, as marketers, we're like, oh, but this data vendor got it, wrong. This is wrong, like 2% of the time. Data is not 100%. Like no vendor is going to be 100%. You have to, assess it for your situation.
Yeah, I agree. I think, this brings me to a topic. The way we internally use data at the account level to drive a model is we have demographics, right? Size of business and that. And we have technographics, because to us, we care about technologies. It's a big thing.
Definitely.
And then we have, like, Crunchbase has data on how if somebody's fast growing, or if they have a certain set of board members or venture-backed, capital infrastructure, and then we tie that into scores, a finance score, a technology score by CRM, by marketing automation, an intent score. We have clusters of sales intelligence, lead routing, and data hygiene, and then competitors. And then we have the general firmographics, so they all create their own independent scores. So like if a marketer wants to look at a series of target accounts by any one of those attributes, they can. And then there's an accumulative score, and then the accumulative score gets the engagement score driven. There's a one separate score with the engagement score. So like if you're a sales rep and you have your set of target accounts, to me, I've done sales and I love responding to engaged leads, but like if I can just look at my set of best accounts and rank them by engagement and all the other stuff that is important, demographics and intent, I'm like, boom, I just want to hit the lowest hanging fruit. And then the 4 or 5 personas that you want to call when they're showing intent for the few signals that are showing on your thing. And so it makes it super easy. And I think that's what you just took me through there. It's like all of that should drive a total. Now, what do you see is used most to create these like models? Is it done in Excel? Where do you find that companies are keeping this information?
Well, I think especially from marketing operations and living so much of my life in Marketo, what I'm seeing more of, right? Because there's so much data, right? You hear about Tableau, you hear about BI. I think from a marketing operations perspective, I think we need to grow with where the role is taking us now, right? Which is we need to grow into the analytics piece and live in data warehouses, and where I'm seeing Marketo and Salesforce and Excel and Tableau isn't good enough anymore, right? Because we have all of this data. It has to all be aggregated somewhere in a place, right, where we can write the logic rules for the scoring, because we can't just shove like 15 scores at a salesperson or a marketing person. So what I'm seeing a lot of is for growing companies is also having a BI team, a data engineering team, a data set team, and a separate, data lake or data warehouse where all of these things need to feed into. And where I think from a marketing operations and marketing ops professional is we're getting pushed into, we need to also start getting out of just, a Marketo admin and knowing a little bit of Salesforce into more of, we need to be expanding into the BI realm and have familiarity with how to work with analytics folks and data scientists and data engineers, so we can have a seat at the table from a business perspective to drive some of these strategic conversations around, well, how are we going to aggregate the data, right? Like you're saying, an engagement score, a technographic score, right, from all these different signals and bringing them together. And then there's what we're seeing is also like, do you build yourself? Do you buy? What pieces do you buy? And that leads to a whole additional level of strategic, thought experiment.
I agree. Yeah, it's there's a lot of options out there, and then you start having AI get in the mix, and then, at some point, what a rep wants is contextualized information, right? And that's where I find there's got to be a mix of two, right? There should be like this, I call it the best buyer model, right? Where if you're the head of sales or marketing in your organization, you're in demand gen, you should know, like, the key characteristics of your best buyers, just by having that touch with them. And so from a management perspective, what I've seen with some of like the PE firms and stuff who really want to get their company focused is they buy them the AI stuff that like tells you if it's an A, B, or C, and sales reps are like, yeah, whatever. And then they have their best buyer model that like spits out the criteria. It was like, it was this size, they had this technology installed, they had this intent, they were searching these 30 things, like, call them.
Well,
So
I think there's two sides of the coin, or was it? It's a double-edged sword. Well, because a lot of those times where I've seen, those profiles, it's like, well, yeah, I could have told you that without, doing the model. It's like the salespeople go like, well, duh, So I do think those are helpful, in some use cases. But where I see a lot of fallacy happen in data in general and coming up with models is that the fallacy of we're biasing what we're doing.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Like I always joke, or I always say, like, we really need to be the data whisperer, meaning we need to listen to the data, what the data is telling me. So when someone asks me, and these questions are hard, I've spoken for years about analytics and reporting, and it's a very popular topic because this is something that everyone wants, they need it, to prove their worth and keep their jobs. Every, CMO and VP of marketing wants to know like what's happening to their marketing and where their investments are going. But these are very open-ended questions. And so people ask like, well, what reports do I need to look at? Do I need to look at clicks or engagement, right? But that's not the right answer. What you need to do, again, and this really comes from, and I don't expect anyone to know this because this is what I did for my degree. When we were looking for signals, we're not making the assumption that, hey, if you have purple shoes and you like, cookies and you like chocolate ice cream, therefore you are the ideal customer profile. You're layering that, but we do that all the time. I mean, you laugh. I'm sure all of you are laughing at home too. Like, but we do that all the time.
Yeah, that's
right.
I don't really think of it like this, but it's true. Yeah.
We already bias it. So it's like I'm looking for a needle in the haystack. And I'm already saying like, well, is this right? No. And is this right? Because we're already biasing towards it. Instead, it's a data science. It's actually it's from my research, where it's a technical term called unsupervised hierarchical clustering. So if you want to geek out over that, you can geek out over that. But basically what it's saying is all I'm looking at is people that are customers, people that are not, right? Or people that engage in nurtures, people are not. I'm not biasing. It's called an a priori approach. So again, if you want to geek up, it's called a priori, means prior knowledge, means no knowledge. And I'm looking at the haystack and I'm like, I know that where there's a needle tends to discolor the hay. So instead of saying like, is this piece it? Is this piece it? I'm like, let me look and see where the data is clustering, where I'm seeing a pattern. And then I go there and then I dig deeper into that. And I'm like, that cluster looks interesting. Can I tell a story about these pieces, right? So if you see the cluster of, hey, someone really converts well when within 3 days they downloaded an ebook, they signed up for a webinar, but they didn't attend, and they, I don't know, did something else, right? But I'm not coming out with the hypothesis first. I'm actually looking at the cluster of data and seeing if I can tell a story amongst these 10 things. Maybe I can link 4 or 5 of them together into a story. And then it's a process of iteration. Then I do more of that and I go back to the sales team or the SDR team and say, hey, what do you think? Oh yeah, that makes sense. Let's try more of that. And so it's a process of iteration. And this is literally like what I did for my PhD, because what happens is, I talk about those data signals about aggressive breast cancer and not aggressive. We look at clusters of data and it's displayed in color. So we're literally seeing red clusters. And then we go look at the data points, which are genes and proteins. And we're trying to see, are they part of the same family? Do they interact? Can I tell a story around them? And then we build the story that way. So it's very much the same thing, right? And that's exactly the same kind of analysis that I do when someone asks, here's my digital marketing. Tell me what's working, right? Because it's a very open-ended question. We just look at the data and see what's an outlier. What are things that are colored and clustered together? And can I tell a story? So for example, what we found out from one of the analysis of that I did for an engagement, it's like, this unsubscribe rate for people that are engaged in nurture is exceptionally low. So that tells to me that, people that are engaged, you can send them a lot of messages, it doesn't bother them, right? Versus people that aren't engaged, they're annoyed after and they just don't want to hear from you. Versus the other question that I hear, which again, I don't think is the question I would not ask, is how many emails do I send until people are pissed off and unsubscribe? I'm sure you hear that question a lot, right?
Oh, yeah.
But that's not the right question. You got to come at it the other way around.
I like that. Yeah. So, now that we've kind of understand a little bit more about your background and analytics and success stories, do you have any like data horror stories where, you can share that just took you off your game?
Well, I mean, data cleanliness and data hygiene is paramount to being able to execute effectively as a marketer, right? Period, end of story, full stop, right? I mean, the biggest thing that all of us, encounter is, duplicates. You need to have an active strategy to deal with duplicates, right? Our databases are living, breathing machines that we need to respect, right? It's not going to keep itself clean, right? Got to have a house cleaner come in on a regular basis. You got to tune up your car on a regular basis. There's no difference to keeping your database clean. But how many of us marketers out there is that on top, top priority or top of their list? Probably it's like, yeah, I'll get to it. But here's how it affects, what happens. If you have duplicates, then, duplicates affect attribution, right? If you're doing something and something's a duplicate and you have 10% duplicates in your database, sometimes you have 30% duplicates in your database. That's, if those duplicates are active, you're attributing to to a different person. Is that revenue leakage okay with you? Or where do we place that importance? There's things like, I talked last 2 years ago now. It's been 2 years since I've been at Summit in Vegas. I talked at Summit at the keynote about ABM, right? People want to do ABM, but we can't even talk about starting an ABM strategy until we have clean account level data. Mm-hmm. And it gets to the granularity, right? The VPs of marketing aren't thinking about, well, do you call GE, or GE Healthcare, GE period, Inc., right? Like a VP isn't thinking about that when they're saying, hey, we need to have an ABM initiative. But that data account cleanliness is at the crux, that data dictionary and that data account cleanliness is at the beginning. You can't do anything until you can agree on, how accounts are labeled in your CRM or in your data warehouse, right? You can have the best alignment with sales and marketing. You can have your entire marketing ABM strategy. You can have cross-channel, direct mail, omni-channel, right? All that stuff. But you're basically dead in the water if you can't figure out how to identify Acme Co, right?
I agree. Yeah. And not to mention, like, we all do, I see people do these big target account, like, strategy sessions, and they don't even have parent-child hierarchies, or, like, they don't know if the companies are invested by the same portfolio or something, and all of a sudden you input that data and they're like, oh, wow, my entire target strategy changed. Just this one company owns like 300 others, and, maybe we should, go after and align a little differently. I really have, and I think the audience could get a lot of value out of this question, because you branded yourself around Marketo and Adobe for a reason, right? And
Yes.
I want to know why, like, you love, and just technically, why do you like Marketo so
I love
much?
Marketo.
And you could probably talk for hours.
Yeah.
But just
Because I came from a demand gen background, so I did years of demand gen, field marketing. I lugged booths on an airplane, as I'm sure many of you all out there have, right? So I've been in situations where, as a demand gen person, I'm beholden to whoever owned the automation system at the company, and my success is tied to their success. And, I bleed purple. Now Marketo Engage purple-ish Adobe red. It's a different shade of purple. It's like magenta now, right? It's very red. But I bleed purple because the entry to get into being able to use Marketo is low. Meaning, we can get and enable and empower marketers. And if you've been in the Marketo Engage community for a really long time, like 7, 8, 9 years ago, their motto was marketers first. They drank the Kool-Aid. We drink the Kool-Aid. It's marketers first. It's not, let me go talk to a marketing operations IT professional to explain to them that aren't marketers what I'm trying to do, which I've been there. And so my success was hindered by that barrier, versus I can go into now Marketo is incredibly powerful, but the barrier to getting in and democratizing the utilization of Marketo is much wider, and it's more powerful, and it's scalable, right? So I was at a point can be the only marketing person at a company, and actually in 2014 I gave a talk at Summit, so it was a long time ago, about building your virtual demand gen army with Marketo, because a small company has very similar challenges as a large company, but there's only one of me, right? But with Marketo, it can scale, and you can do things really, really smart, and you can really push the envelope. And I don't need to have the very intense, coding background. I mean, Marketo really is visual coding. So, and I can tell you right now, I am not a coder. I lasted 3 days in a Perl class in grad school and was like, this is not for me. I was like, I'm trying to parse a table. Nope, not me. So it's accessible to the majority of marketers, right? Because marketers, think a certain way. And there are those people that span into, marketers who are very tech savvy, but there are also those marketers that don't. So you're able to, it's able to appeal to a large variety of audiences without sacrificing the power. So that low barrier to entry, the marketing first, the scalability, and really, you can tinker with Marketo, right? Because a lot of times if it's very simple, you kind of lose the power behind it. But I mean, I'm coming up with new ways to do things in Marketo every week, and pushing the envelope of like, oh, well, here's this nifty thing that right? Because it's a double-edged sword. It's a blank slate, right? So it can be challenging, I think, when people have the when it's just basically setting expectations, right? I mean, I've been, I think less so now, but I came from a world, many moons ago, where Marketo was like this one line item in your job description, right? Where you did demand gen, you did this, and it's like, and you own the automation system Marketo. I'm like, that's 3 people's job right there. But I think there is, over the course of the past decade or so, an appreciation for us, marketing operations professionals, which is fantastic. Right? Because it's not Excel, it's not Word, it's not,
You guys are taking over the entire life cycle of the journey. So like everybody, like finance even has to talk to the Marketo admins to send out their emails, right? And like, hey, can you templatize this invoice email for me?
Does it make sense, or does it make sense to come out to Marketo and making those decisions? Like, do we want employees in Marketo, so we send HR communication out of it, right? Things like that, and where, and this kind of comes back to, marketing operations and why I chose that as why I've stuck with it as a profession, because, I say that we're the center of the universe, not to be like, hey, we're important, but we're the center of the universe underneath, like in the basement, right? Where if everything's going well, no one's going to give us a call and be like, hey, you're doing an awesome job. It's we power and our stakeholders run the gamut at the company, and we can affect, and really we're an accelerant. We're an accelerant to everything that demand gen, that field marketing does, that sales does. We can accelerate and impact such a large scope at the company, because we touch so many aspects of it, and it's a very...
That's a great explanation. An accelerant is what the ops department is. I love that. One more question about just kind of a lot of the listeners love to solve big problems with data, and they know they have maybe a challenge, but getting people to take it seriously and buy a solution, not even a solution, or make an engagement, get executive sponsorship to address a problem that has to do with data. It can be a challenge. And so what do you think when you're going into your organization wanting to address, a challenge, whether it's better analytics or being able to enable ABM? Obviously, like when you're needing a data solution, like what heartstrings are you pulling to get those types of, things approved?
Right, it's creating that business case. And a lot of times, the executive leadership wants to see, well, if you buy this solution, how much more revenue am I going to get? And that's a really challenging question to answer, because mobs, we're an accelerant, right? Like we don't make the phone calls, we don't book the meetings, we don't create the campaigns, but we have to make the justification, because typically, in a lot of things, we own the tech stack, the investment, and the bill that does that. Right. So, in an ideal case, I can make the business case by calculating on FTE, so full-time employee time, translating efficiencies, right? Like the number of hours, so I brought in a solution where before we were manually doing it. So that was like, well, we have to do this. Because it's harder, because it's like, well, either we have the data or we don't, so it's really hard to translate to revenue numbers. But if, and in many cases from the executive leadership team, they want to see hard and fast numbers, and that's where partnering with the sales team, like someone on the sales side, where, okay, and you have to do, it's really back of the envelope calculations, right? Where it's like, okay, if we were able to increase meeting conversion rate by X%, right, because like say you have to dial 100 phone calls to make, X number of meetings to hit your goal. If we were able to provide this data and this data, I need sales and BDR feedback to say, if I was able to provide you this and this and this, what could your meeting booking rate percentage change? And what people don't realize is that people are so focused on the funnel, and like they're trying to get more out of the revenue, and what they do is they just pour more stuff up top. Right? I need more revenue, so I'm just going to pour more stuff at the top. 2x the amount of stuff at the top. Unless you've played with an Excel model, which I have one, where you change a middle funnel piece by 1%. Tiny. It is many times more effective than 2 or 3x the increase in the
Wow.
top of funnel, and it's just straight math. It's just straight math.
I believe it. I'm a believer. I've gone into many a management meeting with that same message.
I have an Excel
I love it.
spreadsheet. I'm like, here's the math. Let me show you. And then I back it up with partnering with the BDRs and partnering with the leaders of sales and inside sales and saying, how do I increase this 1%? If I gave you this, so you can have better conversations, and then let's pilot it. Let's get the hard data with like 1 or 2, really good, reps that work in partnership. That's going to help me champion it from the sales and the marketing side together, right? And then show the data where if I provide this data, or hey, we have duplicates. This is obscuring 20% of the revenue that I may or may not be getting. I don't know.
Yeah, could be why we're not hitting that projected pipeline and we got to this pipeline. We're not hitting the what is it called when the AI tells you what you're going to hit that quarter, and you just come in a little bit low because it's 20% of your records were duplicates. But actually, we're at the end of our hour right now. I think we're going to have to do this like 2 or 3 more times because I think you have so much knowledge that we didn't even begin to scratch the surface. But Jessica, I think we really all, I think I'm speaking for the listeners and everybody in the community, appreciate not just what you share on the show today, but just being you in the community. And we appreciate you being here today, and want to wish you luck to all the other engagements that you probably have coming right around the corner.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. So Grant, you're going to need to end the clip, and then we have another call back to back with one more person. So okay. Jessica, we won't release anything until we send you a bunch of edited clips. Okay. The turnaround typically takes like 3 weeks. It's not quick because there's a lot of time, stuff that goes into it. But we really appreciate you, and I'll probably send you like in the next few days this Sendoso thing, so we can send like a cool Ember coffee mug to your house, and you can have something for being here with us today.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to leave the
browser open. Okay. Yes. And Grant, are you there? Can you confirm that you can hop off though? You there? Just 1 second.